fuel choice that even rivals can agree on? Now that's worth the hype. Cheaper, cleaner, and homegrown. Pump it up with Unleaded 88.
Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow, together on one pod, talking Hawks and all things Big Ten. Powered by GameDay Men's Health, with locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, and North Liberty. From the Channel Seed Studios, this is Legends and Listeners. Exclusively on Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. Welcome into an episode of Legends and Listeners that would have been hard to predict about 5 days ago here from the Channel Seed Studios. I don't know I guess the odds for Iowa still playing on this Thursday morning, Scott, would have been you'd have to parlay money line against Nebraska and then parlay the money line against Ohio State. Iowa was a 7.5 point dog against Nebraska, 5.5 against Ohio State. So whatever that amounts to, those were the odds. Probably like +5 something, which is a very long shot. But Hawkeyes are still playing. Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register here, back in Iowa. Scott Dochterman of The Athletic over in Indianapolis. Scott, we're trading places every week right now.
Yeah, I was in Indianapolis 2 weeks ago. You were here last week, and who knows, next week maybe you're here in Indiana.
With the women. I'll be with the women somewhere.
Yeah, I know, in South Bend, Indiana, or something like that. So, yeah, it's back and forth. But, yeah, long day of basketball, long day of driving to get to basketball. And here we are, midnight locally in Indianapolis, and I guess past midnight now. And here you are.
It is a Thursday show. It is a Thursday show.
It is. We're back on Thursday again. It's almost live, so.
Almost, yeah. Well, we're going to talk Big Ten tournament. We're going to talk women's. We're going to talk a little bit of California, actually, and maybe a little something else late in the show if we get to it. But Scott, let's start, I think, right, with the Iowa men, just because, to even get to the Big Ten tournament was kind of a miracle. Now they've actually won 2 in a row for the first time since early January. So just a kind of an upset type deal right now. It feels like to me, Scott, I mean, we've covered this men's team for a long time. You covered them even longer, consecutively, going back before I got on the beat back in, the 14. So, yeah. It seems like when Fran's teams have a lot of pressure on them, like they kind of tense up and don't come through in these situations. But this is like a perfect storm for Fran's teams. No pressure, playing free. Seems like they're playing for their coach. I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing in the body language, the quotes, everything. It just seems like they're finally playing like how we expected them to play.
Yeah, Josh Dix kind of mentioned that he thought that they were playing with house money a little bit, and it's true. You come here, you're the last seed to get in, and you're 15. Nobody expects you to do anything from this moment on. But this isn't your. It is in some ways your typical 15 seed, but it's also, this team had a winning record. Now we look back at some of those wins in November and December and understand why. But all things being said, Chad, you look at the two teams that were on the floor tonight, Ohio State and Iowa. And yes, Ohio State blasted Iowa a couple of months ago in Columbus, but when you look statistically at all the key areas, this was a pretty even matchup. And, the one thing Iowa, of course, did not have is Owen Freeman, and that's going to be a continual issue for them. But Ohio State had some issues too. And I thought Iowa showed a lot of grit and determination throughout the game, especially in the second half when things looked like they were going to slip away. And then, they went out and got tough and made key plays. I mean, and all of them did. I thought Brock Harding was really good. And I thought, majority of the players, I mean, they had 4 in double figures. I mean, this was a tough win, and they were very excited after the game. I mean, once, they got close to the locker room, they were all kind of huddled around there, and they really, started whooping it up. And I think that's impressive when you look at this team and what they're playing with and what they've had to deal with. And, not only with injuries and lack of success, but all the speculation about their head coach. And so you got to give it to the players for believing in themselves and going out and put forth a great effort.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of moments like this are like why you love the postseason in basketball, no matter what. And that's why I think over the years, people get frustrated with Iowa basketball because they don't get these moments. They get to this point most years and they fall flat, especially when something big is on the line. And so it's just to me, it's almost a little bit of a reminder of this is what Iowa basketball should be, this is what it should be every year, where you're kind of stepping up in the postseason and you're coming up clutch. And, they've done that obviously from time to time. It's not like it's never happened. 2022 over in Indianapolis, a great example. But that's the only time that they've won 2 games in the Big Ten tournament or more. So it's just it's a nice moment for sure. Obviously, you're happy for the players. I'm happy for Peyton Sanford especially, who's, been the face of the struggles this year, really. For those guys to get to play together again, heck, a guy like Drew Thelwell, it seems like such a positive guy that comes here and really embraces Iowa. They embrace him, and he's still going. Brock Harding's had some ups and downs this year. He did a really nice job, hit the dagger 3 late to kind of put this one away. I think he was 3 for 3 from 3-point range. And then I guess the last thing I would say is a guy when you lose Freeman, big loss, obviously. But I feel like Fran and the team have done a really good job of figuring out how to replace him. And the platoon of Evan Bronze and Ladji Dembele really has been successful. I mean, it gives you a couple different options there. It's not Owen Freeman, but Bronze has been incredibly efficient. And Dembele tonight, Scott had one of his better games. I mean, he hit his free throws. He had 8 points, 9 boards in 28 minutes, and he looked like a force in there. So, sometimes with adversity, you find some positives, and it feels like late in the year, this team is the Price Sanford's had a really strong finish there. You're finding a lot of positives with this Iowa team.
And as you said, this is what you see coming into a tournament like this. You just don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if hey, Sunday was the feel-good moment. You won at one of your rivals, and you knocked them out from the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament in one big swoop. And then you come here and you could always rest on it and say, okay, we did our job. And no, but they kept pressing and they kept playing. And even with issues in the post, I mean, as you said, with Evan Bronze, I mean, statistically, he didn't do anything, if you want to say, but at the same time, it doesn't matter because he's out there defending and he's out there, doing his job and screening. And sometimes that's what it's about. It's not always about scoring. And then, and sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way for rebounds, but he's doing what he's asked to do. And I think Brock Harding, coming off the bench, he's really, I don't know if embraced his role is the right way to describe it, but he's really handled that role in fine fashion. He's 5 of 6 tonight. He had 3 turnovers and 3 assists, but he was doing what it took to win this game. And when you look at the opponent that they were facing, then I felt like they were pressing because they had everything at stake. If they win, they're probably at worst a first 4 team. They lost, they're not going to that tournament. Maybe they'll meet again in the Crown or something like that, or the NIT. But Ohio State's done now. Iowa just stuck a dagger in them, and if you're, if you believe in Schadenfreude and you really feel like this, I mean, you just knocked out two teams, and you're letting them, you're wallowing in their misery while you're the one impacting it. And I guess if you're going to, tomorrow they're not knocking a team out of the NCAA tournament, but you're facing your biggest rival. And, that's going to have its own little war in its own.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned it. Iowa, Illinois, 5:30 on Thursday. Obviously, the shelf life of this conversation is pretty short here, Scott, but hopefully folks are listening on Thursday morning, getting prepped for the game. The Hawks, a couple things about this game is Iowa got drilled earlier this year, and Sanford and Dix were non-factors in that game. So obviously we saw Wednesday night, when those guys are on, we've known this, they've got a chance. And then if you get those complementary contributions on top of them, that's when you can win the game. That's what Iowa got. I mentioned Dembele, I mentioned Harding, I mentioned Price. Sadie Traore also had a nice game. 4 points, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, plus 12, just little contributions like that. But what do you expect? Illinois, this is a couple schools that don't like each other, had their history. It is kind of a fun opportunity, I guess, if you look at it that way. It's not like you're playing USC, you know what I mean? You're not playing Rutgers. You're playing Illinois, and Illinois means something. Going back to our childhood in the 80s, Iowa, Illinois means something all the time. Even when the two teams were terrible back in 18, they met in the Big Ten tournament. They were the 12 and 13 seeds. I remember it because I was there in New York City. Iowa beat them, and it meant a lot. So, what do you make of this matchup, Scott?
I mean, there's some challenges with this, of course, and you got to start with the rebounding. I mean, Iowa has done a nice job of kind of covering up the woes. Now, shooting 54% from the field will do that, but they've covered up their inability to rebound effectively, where this matchup is going to be really challenging because they are second in the Big Ten when it comes to rebounding margin. Iowa's like 338 in the country. So you're going to have to hit a lot of your first chances here. But Illinois is one of those teams that are still a little too young, but you see them for what they could be, and what they could be is a very dangerous team. They've got some really good players, and a couple of them are foreign, and I think that's going to be a challenge for Iowa to keep up. But I did ask Dix about the rivalry factor. He's like, yes, this is a rivalry game, and he understands what's at stake that way. And along with just playing, there's one line of thought is you're just playing another opponent and you're in the tournament, but two, you're playing a team you don't really like very much, and they don't like you either, and that's what makes it. That's what gives salt its flavor, right? And I think that's what gives a rivalry its flavor. And so I think if nothing else, you're going to get a spirited effort. I mean, you're talking about the two top scoring teams in the Big Ten. Illinois in 1, Iowa 2. So you should have an up-tempo type of game. You're not playing in Champaign, which is a positive because we've seen good and very good and even sometimes great Iowa teams go there and get smoked. So let alone this year, but being as inconsistent as it is. But they are prone to mistakes, Chad. They're 17th in turnover margin in the Big Ten. Iowa's first. And are fourth in that. And then assisted turnover, they're 11th. Iowa's first. So there are areas, if you take care of the basketball, if you shoot it effectively, it mitigates the rebounding margin that you're going to lose on. Although they did out-rebound them in Champaign, which was the craziest stat of the year for me. So I don't look at this as, chalk this one up, it's over, move on. It's likely they're not going to be favored. I don't know if there's a line out yet, but it's still, I think Iowa has a puncher's chance. And anytime you get in a rivalry game with a situation like this, if they're feeling themselves, which they feel pretty good and confident, you know what? Why couldn't they knock off their most hated rival?
Yeah, and Illinois is not quite the Illinois that we're used to either. So, they are the 7 seed in the Big Ten. If Iowa were to win, they'd face 2 seed Maryland. as McCaffery says.
Yeah.
Let's talk Fran here quick before we move on to other stuff. But it definitely, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt these guys are playing, kind of rallying around their coach. I don't know if I'd say they're playing for Fran, but they're really rallying around the circumstances. And I'm happy for Fran. If this is the end for him, then I think it's good for his. I don't know. I just think it's good. It's better that he's going out with some positives here, is all I'm saying. Like, he didn't go out and they didn't lay an egg in Nebraska and that was it. Come to the Big Ten tournament, lay one of those eggs that you did like in 2017 or the last couple of years, honestly, against Ohio State. I mean,
almost every year.
15, 16, 14. I mean, it is pretty remarkable when you look at the history, but heck, he's, there you go, Aiden. And that goes back to Licklider never won a Big Ten tournament game, just for reference. So,
I think that he should have been eliminated before he came here.
Yeah, he wouldn't have made the 15-team tournament.
He shouldn't have made the 11-team tournament. They were terrible.
So, tough history here for the Hawks, except for 22. But anyway, McCaffery earlier this week said, we're going to play in the Crown or the NIT if we can. What do you think? Like, I mean, Beth's not going to wait for the Crown to make a decision. So, it's, I don't know. They make the NIT somehow now? Because now they're 17 and 15. Maybe you can't. I mean,
I don't think you worry about the postseason.
I don't think Beth is going to worry about that.
Unless they win Sunday here.
So yeah, sure.
That's a different animal altogether. But when you're looking at this right now, Chad, and if you're Beth, you can't make your decision based on a win against Ohio State, a win against Nebraska, hell, even a win against Illinois. I mean, it makes it difficult in the public's eye. It makes it more difficult because you're truly if you make that decision, you're letting go of a good coach. He is a good coach. Now, he has flaws like everybody, but Licklider was an easy decision. I mean, they had the worst team in Iowa history. They were 10 and 22 that last year. They were just it was really untenable. With Fran, you can make a case that, hey, on the floor, okay, they struggled this year, but they still have a winning record. They now guaranteed to have a winning record, even with all the woes that they had. You can make the case, and you look at the infrastructure Iowa has with basketball. It's not very good. He's done a lot with that. Now, there's the other side, and this is the side where the decision will probably get made. And that is Iowa's men's basketball average home attendance, 91.31. It's the lowest. I went through box scores of the Register and Gazette from the 60s because they didn't have any of that on file. The lowest I found, the match that's a little bit lower than that, was 1965. 60 years ago. Lower attendance. That's it. That is bad. That's terrible. And then average tickets scanned per game. I didn't count the exhibition, unlike John Steppe with the Gazette, at 5172.
Yeah, that was the number I had too. Yep.
Yeah. So, which means 56.6% of tickets available to Iowa men's basketball were purchased, and only 34.6% of those seats were filled. And it last sold $4 million worth of men's basketball tickets in 04-05. Now, there were other coaches under that long stretch there, 20 years. But Fran's been around for 3/4 of it. So he has a major part in this too. And the business side, you're in the Big Ten, the business side has to win in some respect. And because if you bring him back, Chad, what is he going to do differently, and what are you going to do differently to ensure that you have a better trajectory forward? And that's the big question for Beth. I mean, she could kick the can down the road and say, we're going to give him, we're going to support him, and we're going to bring him back, and we're going to celebrate him. But is that the right move? Well, that's why she makes all the money, and that's why she wanted this job really badly.
Yep, absolutely. So, we thought this show we would probably be in that decision mode or even have a decision by now. And we talked last week, but the Hawks are still playing. So next week's Legends and Listeners, probably a better chance that we know one way or another what's going to happen, at least if there's a change in leadership with the men's program. Anything more you want to get into there, Scott, or we should move to the next thing?
I think we're pretty good. I mean, I've been through 3 games here today, and some interesting stuff. Double overtime finishes.
Rutgers USC. Robbie Hummel was on the air. He goes, "This game won't die."
I know the game that never dies. And then the first one was interesting just because of Northwestern having.
What a story that is. Tell the listeners about that if they're not familiar.
Yeah, I wrote about this. Northwestern is at the Sheridan in Indianapolis, which doesn't have air conditioning this time of year. It won't use it, and it got up to 85 degrees in their rooms, and they're just miserable, which I would be too.
Oh man!
And Chris Collins is already mad at the league over a lot of different things, so he thinks that they have it out for him. But what this is about, but in this case, he's spot on. I mean, you're asking young athletes who are coming here to a tournament to go to a hotel, and they're hanging out in the lobby because it's too hot in their rooms. They're bringing buckets of ice to their rooms to try to cool off while they sleep. That's unacceptable. I mean, it's unacceptable for the Big Ten Conference, which is the most the richest conference there is. This is an issue that's been kind of ongoing with the Sheridan Hotel. And they needed to do something different here. And I understand, whether it's move them to another hotel, do something for them, because this is just, come on, this is Mickey Mouse stuff.
Well, obviously they beat Minnesota, Scott. So, I mean, are they in the same hotel tonight or?
Yes, they are. They're still there. And
wow.
Yeah,
has it cooled off there at all?
I don't know. Maybe I should swing by and say, hi.
Yeah,
but,
wow.
The media hotel's pretty cool, but that's because we're all there.
Well, wow, what an interesting. Yeah. Now, see, he's one of the coaches that I would have on my short list if I'm Beth Getz too.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Maybe this is not that this is a Northwestern issue, but it's like, come on, you're going to treat Northwestern like this?
Yeah, I mean, usually they get treated better than that. I mean, because they're Chicago's Big Ten team, but
that's right.
They've been promoting that for a while. But I think this is you've got to treat your players better than this. I mean, and he kind of went overboard a little bit in some of his descriptions. But guess what? If he believes it, and you're sitting in a hotel room at 85 degrees, then there's something to be said for it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk Iowa women here in a little bit, but first of all, one other topic you're kind of plugging into over there, Scott, for The Athletic. At least that's my read based on some of the interviews you've been doing. Is kind of the newbies in the Big Ten in basketball. We talk so much about USC, Oregon, UCLA, Washington in football because that's the driving force of all this realignment, acquisitions, whatever you want to call it, for the Big Ten. But basketball has been a different animal for these programs, and I feel like it's been different for both the men and the women. So obviously on the women's side, the 2 LA schools got to the championship game of the Big Ten tournament I was at last week, and UCLA beat USC for the title. All 4 of the teams there made the Big Ten tournament. Washington advanced a game. Oregon's going to be, all 4 of them are going to be going to the NCAA tournament. So if you look at the women's side of it, at least as a conference, Scott, like it's strengthened the conference for sure. It's also made life more difficult for the Iowas of the world because that's another thing I feel like with as a tangent, like the Jan Jensen era is graded against, a conference that has UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington in it. And they were, didn't have them under Bluter, so that makes it a little tougher. But on the men's side, you've got one team didn't make it in Washington. You got a 4 seed in UCLA, an 8 in Oregon, a 14 in USC. So I don't know. What are you kind of coming up with over there about all this?
Their challenges are, we probably underestimated some of the challenges, even though we knew them But to go cross country and play 2 games, I had a side interview with Eric Musselman after the double overtime win. He's sick. He didn't sleep a wink last night. He says sometimes he'll text his guys in the middle of the night and they'll respond right away, like at 3 a.m, because they can't sleep either because their patterns are all messed up. And you think about it, going 3 hours east, and one of the scheduling issues that he really overlaid, and it's totally understandable, is USC had to go play Maryland and Rutgers consecutively, then fly back a couple of days later, play Ohio State at home, and then a couple days after that go play Oregon on the road. And he's like, and that's not a half-hour flight to Oregon from USC. They may be West Coast, but think about that. I mean, that's like flying from Minneapolis to Arkansas or something like that when you start talking length. And and he said the game that was really the biggest killer was the one at home, because they're flying 6 hours back, and then all of a sudden you turn around and you got to play another game. It's like our legs weren't there, and they got bounced. And so I talked to Danny Sprinkle a couple weeks ago about the same issue when he was in Iowa City, just to kind of see what the mood and the temperature is on, what kind of changes need to go forward. And one of the things he mentioned was maybe eliminating the extra day in some of these trips, that they want a 2-day prep. That's a principle that the coaches are really adamant about, but it's a different, when you're talking about 18 teams versus 14, right, it's just a different dynamic. The other thing that Musselman had mentioned, and I can't wait to get Mick Crone to talk about this tomorrow. Yeah, he's going to really tee off. One of the things that the Musselman mentioned was that he thinks that they should go with like 3-game trips, road trips.
Sure, yeah, I agree.
He's like, I was in the NBA and I was in the CBA and G League and all this other stuff, and this is what they did. He feels like that would be more acceptable. And I said, so you're saying you want to go to, like, say, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, on a Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday or something like that? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. That'd be much better, much healthier for us. So, even though 3 games in a row on the road is not what you really want, but if you're going to be a cross-country conference the way they are, you got to think differently. And the coaching principles, where it used to be Rutgers to Nebraska and Rutgers to Minnesota, and even then they would try to mitigate some of those travel issues for those schools that would have to go that far. Now it's completely out of whack. So I think it's fascinating. And then, as you mentioned with the women, Musselman said, he goes, well, we need to go get a Juju Watkins. We have to be 3 to 4 games better than everybody else on the West Coast because of all the travel we're enduring. And so I think there's some really fascinating discussions they're going to have about this, because you want these teams to be competitive. Right. You want them to have equal opportunities, and Oregon's been pretty good at times. All of their losses have been coming in the Big Ten. UCLA is struggled at times and then came back, because they played Iowa that one time and then took off from there. They've been really good. And USC at times has played well, and Washington, of course, hasn't as much. But you need to give them as many opportunities. And we know they knew the travel was going to be tough. We all knew it. But in some ways, it's probably more difficult than we could have imagined.
Yeah, and I mean, I was over at the women's tournament last week, and the first game of Thursday was Oregon, Indiana. So Oregon's playing 9 a.m. Pacific time. Mm-hmm. Again, it happens. I mean, Washington played a 9 a.m. football game its time at Kinnick, but I don't know. It's just you have to acknowledge that this is not normal, So, mm-hmm. or not, not what it's been, and it is a challenge. I mean that. Mm-hmm. You're asking a lot of these teams, and most importantly, these athletes, mm-hmm. that have class. Yeah. And it's hopefully it's being discussed. I'm guessing your article will raise that issue a little bit more. So I'm glad you're doing it. And we're not crying a river for these teams. They're getting more money or whatever, but it's still, it's worth a discussion for sure. And and I can tell you for a fact, those Yeah, but just because they're out west, there doesn't mean they're all close to each other. So,
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, that's a long way from LA to Seattle. Long way.
It's
it's like a long drive from Seattle to, if you wanted to even get to Northern California, like that's a long haul. So
now you drove, when you went out there for women's basketball, you flew into Portland, drove to Eugene, then drove up to Seattle. Did you fly out of Seattle or fly out of Portland again?
I flew back out of Portland.
Okay.
Yes.
From Eugene to Seattle, it's what, about 5 hours?
About 4.5. Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about Iowa City to Minneapolis is basically that type of a drive, and that's their closest by far to those two. And then of course the LA schools would play each other, but you're talking about, and one thing is like Iowa goes out and plays the LA schools and they're in the same hotel, that you don't have to, worry about it. And for their trip too, you think about that, Chad, and it's like, well, do they really need to go for the whole week? To go from Sunday to fly out, play Tuesday, then you're prep on Wednesday and Thursday, and then play again Friday and get back, and one of the things Musselman was like, we got back at, we played on Sunday and we got back at 5:30 in the morning and on a Monday morning, and then they got to go to class right after that, and then you play like Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever day it was. I'd have to look up specifics, but these are human beings. These are kids. They're supposed to be students too, and they get a lot of advantages, no question. But these are things that the adults in the room have to figure out to help them, to navigate, a very incredibly tough time. I mean, you mentioned Oregon. Oregon plays Indiana, first thing Thursday morning at
same matchup,
noon Eastern, 9, and then if Oregon wins, then they play Michigan State the same time on Friday. So it's you're asking people to do stuff with their body clocks, and you want to be fair to everybody. This is a learning experience. The Big Ten, for the most part, has said, look, we're just going to try to we're working through this season. We're going to take our lumps and learn our lessons and then move forward. And that's the right thing to do, to see what happens next. But there's some ideas that they're probably going to have to float out there. I mean, is 20 games the right number? You want to play each other more, but you're asking them to cross the country that often. Is 18 more sane? Do you say, all right, we're just not going to play everybody in a given year? I mean, you've got to ask those questions, because if you drop it down to say 18 games, and then say, we want to keep you on the West Coast, maybe play Minnesota and Nebraska or Iowa more regularly than Rutgers and Maryland. Those are all questions that they should probably be having to ensure that everything's a little more fair.
Yeah, the women play 18 games. Just get the one crossover rival, like Iowa's is Nebraska.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has kind of their own natural pairing. I mean, UCLA, USC, Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, Northwestern. I mean, it all kind of Purdue, Indiana, Michigan State. I mean, it seriously does just kind of balance out. So I don't think that's a bad idea. And I mean, when the Iowa men went out to LA, they were there for 6 days because they wanted to adjust. Yeah. I mean, of course, they got drilled both games. Didn't help. But so that was a miserable trip. But just imagine if you did that 4 times or 5 times. Yeah. Because you got to do it 5 times on the West Coast, or probably 4. 4 trips, right? So
this is their 5th trip east for all of them. Yeah. The three that made it, because they've got 3 double plays and then they've got 1 single play, and they've. And the league has tried, and I think you got to give them credit for that. I mean, they're playing either Minnesota or Nebraska as the closest to the West as their single play trip this way, and then they've tried to batch them up. But I remember talking to Danny Sprinkle from Washington, and I'm like, so you guys going to hop on the bus and go to Wisconsin? He goes, no, we're going to fly. He goes, we can hop on the bus there? I go, yeah, it's like less than 3 hours. He goes, I didn't know that. So they're learning about this too. And so there's a lot to be learned, and they've got a long way to go to make this, and it was always going to be tough. There is an element of people that'll say, well, they knew that going into this, and why did they expand? And I get that, but for the athletes, that's not their fault. But adults made financial decisions. So I don't know. I think it's interesting nevertheless. And we talked about sports beyond basketball and football, and that gets really crazy.
Good stuff. Yeah, I know the Iowa women did fly from Eugene to Seattle, for what it's worth.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on. Great stuff, actually. I'm glad we did that topic. That was kind of a fun little curveball there, Scott.
Yeah,
Nicely done.
So.
Good job, Athletic, New York Times. Game Day Men's Health, great sponsor for us, the title sponsor, basically. We love Game Day Men's Health. I got a 5K this Saturday, Scott, and I went in on Wednesday and I said, just give me a little extra, can you? For the race. They did not oblige. I can't just command extra tea, but the tea is certainly awesome. It helps my mood, helps my energy, helps everything. I just feel so much better. And that's kind of the idea of their testosterone replacement therapy. They can help you with weight loss too. Get yourself connected with Game Day Men's Health. It's no obligation, private, free consultation. GameDayMen'sHealth.com. Their Ankeny location is crazy. You have to go up there sometime. It's crazy nice. See, I don't really go there because I live closer to the West Des Moines location. But I had to go there once because of the snowstorm, and it's like this palace up there in Ankeny. And the West Des Moines office is a little bit more modest, I would say. So is North Liberty kind of in between or what, Scott?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's kind of part of one of the many new strip malls because North Liberty, of course, is growing at a rapid pace. So, but it's only a couple blocks from my house, so it's nice there. Now that the weather has changed, I'm going to be able to walk in the morning over there, and looking forward to that. And, although I used to say that too, and then it'd be like 7:53 and I need to be there at 8, and I'm like, well, I better drive. But no, but it's been great. I had a full checkup this week, and I'll get the blood results in a little bit, but great stuff. I'm excited so far. Awesome.
Well, let's talk about Iowa women. We didn't really talk about the exit of the Big Ten tournament last week. Tough one for the Hawkeyes, but it was a successful week over there in Indianapolis. The Hawkeyes lose in the quarterfinals to Ohio State by 1 point. I ended up I didn't write about officiating per se in my column, but it was more about kind of the cruel nature of March when you get into these games for seniors. And, Sydney Falter was kind of the example I used because, here she was, Scott. Hawks are down 5, and she hits back-to-back threes to put them up 1 going into the final minute. I mean, just talk about clutch, Scott. 1 from the left, 1 from the right. Lines them both up and just drills them. I mean, those are just unbelievable moments, as a senior, kind of your last ride type thing. This is your spotlight year. And, she comes down, drives to the hoop, deserved to get the foul call. I mean, she got fouled going to the hoop with 3 seconds left. They just didn't call it. And the ball went out of bounds. Iowa loses by 1. It's a tough pill to swallow when you have 2 losses left in your career, and that ends up being one of them. So, that was kind of like I guess that was what I kind of ran with coming out of that game, sort of the fragility of March, and just, man, it's tough when you lose in those moments like that, those tough calls. I mean, I know, you think about like the Iowa State, Ohio State NCAA tournament game a long time ago, the charge call. I think Aaron Kraft was involved. I'm trying to stir Aiden into the conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Here.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, block charge right there. Aaron Kraft.
No, I mean, but that's what I mean. Like sometimes it comes down to this, and it's unfortunate. I mean, women's basketball officiating, it's been a story for so long now, going back to the LSU Iowa title game. It was the story. Like the national writers in Dallas were writing about, other than Angels finger waving, they were writing about the officiating in that game, and they changed the rule for technical fouls because of the way they called the one on Caitlin Clark that gave her 4th foul. So
yeah,
I don't know what did you make of kind of the whole circumstances there in the final minute against Ohio State?
Yeah. First, I want to mention that, remember the Titans, the scene, I got holding on 78 White, which I bring up sometimes. But,
yes, you do.
But then they just, Mr. Official, can I speak with you? Not if you want to stay in this game. That's the way it felt like with Lisa Bluter trying to talk to the officials in that game. And it just felt so unfair more than anything else. And whether they would have lost it, anyway, is irrelevant. They probably would have, they didn't give up. They didn't do very well in 3-point defense that day. But all that being said, this one, it was frustrating because Cody McMahon gets a gift call that near the bucket. Maybe she would have made that shot. I mean, she kind of made the follow through anyway. And then she's the hero. But why gift her that? And then likewise on the other end, the pictures are obvious. I mean, when you grab across, you reach in and you grab, and it's not just a reach in where you nick somebody. I mean, you reach in and you grab like everything, and that's not called a foul.
She pulled her arm down.
Yeah, I mean, it's a foul. So, not to sound like Joe Fan out here, but call it both ways. But truly, that's been the problem with women's basketball officiating at every level, at least college and pro, for a long time. It's inconsistent. It's not good. And they somehow, some way, that has to be improved. And, and we could say that about basketball at every level because it's basketball is the most, frustrating of the sports when it comes to officiating. It's probably the most difficult to officiate with the three on the floor. But that was just a heartbreaking end. Now I talked to, Joanna Stolke-Mintz, at our On Iowa Live show on Monday nights in Cedar Rapids. And the rationale in some respects is you almost think of it as a blessing. You try to, to put it in, and that is, you don't feel any negativity about the way you played, even though you lost to a rival. However, you didn't subject yourself to another game, which would have been 4 in 4 days against a team that might have kicked the hell out of you.
They definitely kicked the heck out of Ohio State. Right.
That, if they would have gotten beat by the same score, you would have felt not real good. You could have been more wear and tear. The potential for injury is there. So you have those factors that you think about, and other than the fact that you really wanted to beat Ohio State because you can't stand them and they can't stand you, which, Cody McMahon made abundantly clear after that game. But so I guess the Iowa men got a little bit of revenge for him.
Yeah, there you go.
But, other than that fact, what the negative is not winning at all, not getting a chance to win at all, but you're healthy for the next round and you played well enough to where your net is high enough to probably get a 6 seed. And if you can get a 6 seed, you're playing threes. Iowa's good enough to beat threes. They've played really well. 10 out of 13? Am I right on the math there?
Correct. Yeah. With the 3 losses being UCLA, which was also controversial. Ohio State in overtime, and then Ohio State in the tournament.
By 1. So the regulation loss has been totaled by 3, and then you had an overtime loss at Ohio State. So you got to feel pretty good about the way you're competing right now. And then to get out of this injury free, you knock off a team that beat you during the season, you blast Wisconsin. It sucks that you had to lose, and you had to lose with that, but it also gives you a little bit of a jolt too, like a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, like I hate the way that ended. So I think looking back now, other than the loss to who you lost to, who I almost think Ohio State should be their every year rival now. I think that would be okay to play Ohio State every year, because I felt that about the men. I'm going on a different tangent here, but I felt that about the men, that when you look at the old school Big Ten, when you're starting to match up rivals, Ohio State and Iowa were the ones that kind of got, I don't know if sapped is the right way, but they got stuck kind of playing teams that they wouldn't really consider a true rival. Nebraska and Penn State. They're not basketball rivals for them, but because they're not in the Big Ten originally. where Ohio State and Iowa. It's a very close series. I think it's either tied up like over 200 meetings or something.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I remember Jay Burson ending the 18-0 start back in '87. Right? I got that right? Yeah, Jay Burson.
And didn't Ed Horton have a little bit of fun there too?
I think so.
With him or somebody else that tough foul.
Yes, I think so. Anyway, coming out of one of the reasons I like the 6th seed, if they can get the 6. Now we had our Dargan Southern talk to Charlie Cream on Wednesday, and he feels good about Iowa being a 6. It said there's even a shot that they could get a 5 with the committee just because of the way they're playing. If they weigh that. I mean, right now he's got Maryland as a 5. Mm-hmm. Maryland beat Iowa. I'm not going to say Iowa's going to get a 5. I'm saying they look like a solid 6, like you said. But the reason I like the 6 even more is because the 11s are much. They're more of like the mid majors. Not that you can't lose to a mid major, but you're not. There's a difference between a 10 and 11 if you just look at this. I mean, you're talking like Iowa State. There's some decent teams in the 10 lines. Nebraska's an example. I mean, they're a feisty team. They split with Iowa this year. So anyway, so interested to see the draws. I think the 3 seeds that Cream has right now are Oklahoma, which obviously has its own storyline there. Mm-hmm. Jenny Baranczyk, right? Former Hawkeye, coached by Jan, and obviously a former Drake coach. They have lots of connections there. Dowling, another Dowling connection. Yeah. LSU, how about that? Wouldn't that be something? 3 straight years facing LSU in the NCAA tournament. Duke, which would be fun. Going to Cameron Indoor, I think. I don't like the matchup there for Iowa just because they play a ugly style. I'm not sure. I mean, I think Iowa can win any kind of game, but that's not the kind of style you'd want necessarily. And then Kentucky, that's just kind of a weird one, but that's basically the Virginia Tech coach and Virginia Tech star from last year that they faced in Charlotte. So those are the current 3s right now. Maybe what would be funny is if they get into the TCU bracket, if TCU's a 2, let's say, and they eliminate Haley Van Lith somehow. I mean, that would take a lot. Yeah. For the 3rd straight year in a 3rd different uniform. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I had that conversation with Bill Fennelly last week, actually. He kind of laughed about it too. So yeah. I mean, this is, but the possibilities are there, and they played themselves into this. And a month and a half ago, Chad, we weren't sure that they were going to be able to do this when you were out and watched them lose their 5th straight against Oregon and then play as flawlessly as they ever could against Washington and then come back and beat USC. It really put them on a different path where you could see the confidence and you could see the way that they responded. And so I think this is a team more than capable if they're going to, whether it's Oklahoma or say NC State or even, I don't think Notre Dame will fall to a 3, but if Notre Dame, that would be a tough matchup, no question. But Kentucky with Georgia A. Moore and so they've got some great players, and they're not going to be easy because you're going on the road. But I also think that the opponents will be looking at this going, we're excited. Iowa's a named program in women's basketball, but also say, hey, there could be a slight intimidation factor too. And along with that, you look at how they've played. That's not I wouldn't want Iowa in my bracket. Yeah, it's not a team that you're going, oh yeah, I can't wait to play them. We're gonna get to Sweet 16, and at least as a 3, that's not a. I wouldn't be too excited about that. I'd be like, okay, we've got to really knuckle down to get up here. So
I got one more women's point I want to make, but first of all, I want to thank Iowa Corn, a new partner here on Legends and Listeners. The Iowa Corn folks, hey, I know they've sponsored the IndyCar races out there, the NASCAR races out there. They're a big, obviously huge player here in the state of Iowa, and they have this thing, this Iowa Corn Growers Association. So if you're a member, it's a big deal. Your voice matters. As an Iowa Corn Growers Association member, you can help shape policies that impact your farm from the local level to Washington, D.C. We're not talking politics here, don't worry. The Iowa Corn Growers Association fights for priorities set by farmers, including higher ethanol demand, expanded trade opportunities, and key tax credits. So the Iowa Corn Growers Association wants you to join, be part of the movement shaping the future of Iowa agriculture. Sign up now at iowacorn.org/join. So there you go, farmers. iowacorn.org/join. There you go. So thank you, Iowa Corn, for jumping aboard, and hope you'll stick with us for a little while. One more women's point here, Scott. I think the biggest development on the court was obviously Ava Heiden's emergence. She scores 11 against Michigan State, and that really a stirring win. I mean, Iowa, she helped turn that game around. Iowa comes through late third and kind of pulls away in the fourth. And then she has another 10 against Ohio State and looked really good. I think, Scott, that Jan Jensen, with this time off now, she was using Stuelke and Heiden at the same time in some of these matchups. Stuelke at the 4. See, we talked about Stuelke going back to the 5, which she did. But now you've got the Heiden option. And the Stuelke 4, Heiden 5, that's the idea for next year. And you're finally seeing it kind of click here. So I think Jan Jensen could go to a 7-person rotation, Scott, for the tournament. I'm not saying you dismiss the others, but she's got enough flexibility now because Fulcher's playing, every down minutes as a 4. Right now, and she can slip to the 3 if needed. So you don't necessarily, when Kylie Feuerbach needs a spell, you can go a Fulcher at the 3 and Stuelke at the 4 and Heiden at the 5. And you can go Guyton, Olsen, and McCabe at the 1 and 2. Like they've been doing that anyway. So I think all you need is Guyton and Heiden off the bench. I think 7. I think she can go with it. And that's basically what Bluter kind of, dialed into toward the end of her season. She would get down to about 7 or 8 players. And that's nothing against Taylor Stremlow or Tegan Mullaney, but they've got something here with those 7 players, I think.
Yeah, and I'd be reluctant to not have Addie O'Grady play some minutes, although Ava Heiden is performing. Her upside is way beyond what but Addie, her 10-foot jumper is pretty good, and she's a shot blocker. I think you want to bring her in at times, but I think you've also got to do what it's all about getting the W. And if you feel like you're better with Ava Heiden, and because she's clearly a great athlete and she's going to be a fantastic player long term, if you're better now with her in there, then go with that route. Go that route, and as long as you can. I mean, not injuries, but foul trouble will determine some of that. I mean, if they get, you're going to have to go 3 deep in the post. You're going to have to bring in whether it's Stremlow or Mullaney at times if you get that way. But I'm not opposed to that at all, especially now that you have this extended time off, which has always been the good thing for the women to be able to go, and play. And in their case, 2 weeks, before their first game. So they can kind of get the bumps and bruises out of the way, and they're probably going to get tired of not playing. They're probably going to get edgy by the time they get to play.
Yeah, it sounds like they've had really good practices this week. So sounds like they've responded well from the loss in Indy. So excited to see who they get drawn up with on Selection Sunday. That'll be at 7 o'clock, I believe, Central Time on Sunday night for the women's show. And, haven't really looked into the men's show, but it's usually at 5 o'clock. But we'll look into it if the Hawks win the tournament, I guess.
it is for the Cyclone fans lurking over or something else. Yeah, it's a 5 o'clock. And
Cyclones are going to be a 3, right, Aiden? 3 seed?
3 or what depends.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
got to be a 3. They're really good.
Yeah.
Anyway,
they deserve to be a 3 seed, but who knows? The BYU result. If they win, for sure. If they don't, then you could be playing with that. Are you the 12th or 13th?
Yeah, sure.
Are you the 3 or the 4? I think that could happen, but they are definitely deserving of 3, and based on body of work. So
they're gonna beat BYU. It's my lock.
Ooh, wow.
One more thing, Scott, that happened this week. This is totally, we're moving on from the women here. Last thing I wanted to ask you about, because you're plugged into this stuff more than I am probably. Sounds like, so there's an argument on Capitol Hill about employment versus not employment of these athletes. And sounds like that Greg Sankey has said under an employment model, this is according to Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports, he anticipates that schools will drop to the NCAA minimum of 16 sports. And then he quoted Wisconsin AD Chris McIntosh, who I'm sure you've talked to, saying, I think that is an accurate portrayal. In other words, are we going to see sports cutting be necessary in this revenue sharing or employment era potentially coming, Scott?
Yes, you will. You'll see it in multiple ways. I mean, I've been mystified that Ohio State has kept its 36 sports intact, but at some point it's all gonna come down to paying athletes at the sports that you feel you have a chance to win. And football is always number one in that. And then men's basketball is always going to be number two in that. And then it's going to be about which women's sport's most important to you, and then what niche sport is along with that. So at Iowa, we know what the big four is. Wrestling is 4, women's and men's basketball, and of course football. And then you look at other places, ice hockey at Minnesota, and volleyball at Nebraska, probably Wisconsin that way too. And what's interesting to me is let's take Wisconsin, that volleyball, they're an elite program. They're one of the best in the country. Women's basketball, they're horrible. And Marissa Mosley just, resigned last week. Are they going to, if they have you got this pot, how are you going to disperse it among the volleyball team and the basketball team? Do you look at yourself and go, we can win a national title and get to Final Fours in volleyball. Women's basketball, we can't beat Iowa. We've lost 31 in a row to Iowa. So they say, well, we're just going to participate in women's basketball. Iowa, the complete reversal in volleyball, and they're the party favor in volleyball. Whereas the basketball team is an elite program. Right. And then Title IX will determine that they have to keep all those sports. But when you're looking at the men's side, this is the danger. Where how do you do this? And the fear I have, and I've had this for a little while now, is baseball. I mean, these baseball programs in the North lose about $3 million a year. They subsidize it as good as they can. I mean, they go south all the time to play early. They're not playing at home because they can't play at home. It's beautiful today, but 2 weeks ago it was snowing, and so you have those issues, and you don't. First time you see live pitch outside sometimes is when you're taking BP in some place in Florida. You're not successful at the national level. You can't pay them at the national level like the SEC schools do. So at some point, do you just strip it all down, or say we're just not going to offer any scholarships? We're going to play it like a club sport, maybe a Big Ten schedule with as a club sport, or you just eliminate it altogether. And I hate to say it because I love it, but that's just not. When it comes down to finances, and that's what this is, you're going to have to make those tough choices. And I think men's baseball in particular, for an Iowa, for Michigan State, for Minnesota, Northwestern or some of these other schools, how much financial sense does it make? Wisconsin's already cut it, Iowa State's cut it, UNI cut it. And I would hate to see that, but I just think that's something you've got to keep your radar up on.
Yeah. And the costliness of the sport has to be a factor, unfortunately. But you have to have 16 sports to be Division I eligible, right?
Yeah,
that's correct. So that's why the number 16 comes up there. Iowa State is like right at near the bottom, right? Are they at 16?
Yeah, they are. I think Texas
some schools are already there. Yeah,
Texas, a lot of SEC schools are right at that level too. And if you think about it, like the two things working in different directions is the Big Ten's always been very broad-based. Let's offer as many opportunities for all these athletes to compete, and the money takes care of itself. The SEC is operated under, let's be national powerhouses in these sports, women's gymnastics or baseball or whatever. And which is right and which is wrong, I guess it just doesn't matter. But at this point, if you're determining that we can fund these sports and be successful in these sports, what are we going to do here? And does it make sense financially and otherwise to just trot them out there and wear the Tiger Hawk? Just so you can say you're wearing the Tiger Hawk on baseball team. Volleyball, you're probably funded anyway just because of Title IX, but same type of deal. Or track and field, which I think would be really painful. I thought men's swimming was painful, Chad, because what was it? You've
already got a pool, so.
But was it the butterfly that began in Iowa?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was formed in Iowa City, and you're losing that history, and so I think track and field would be much worse. And you hope you never have to do that, but
yeah, that's a cheaper, not cheaper sport for the number of athletes, but as far as there's not as many games.
Yeah. But baseball is one that I know it's like a $3 million differential.
Yeah.
And you again, that's just one you have to identify if you're starting to look ahead. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's one that.
Yeah. Cause if other Big Ten teams start doing it, then,
wrestling will be damaged for a lot of schools too.
Yeah. Yeah. Wrestling's going to be.
I mean, if you're Purdue
just fewer schools, it's going to happen. Not at Iowa, but
not at Iowa. But if you're Michigan State, if you're Purdue, if you're Northwestern, or some of those schools, even Wisconsin,
because Maryland's going to keep lacrosse. I mean,
in soccer, they'll keep soccer. They're really good at it, and so that's what it's all about. You keep your sports that you're good at, and then you just kind of, and it sucks because you lose those opportunities. Now, I know we're going long here, but the one thing that men's soccer is starting to do is, more of a national association approach, and I think that. This is something that needs to be addressed, is whether it's the Olympic Committee, some sort of national governing body, to funnel some money into the Olympics sports, to make sure that they're still available, whether it's through grants or whatever, hey, if you're sponsoring wrestling, you get $100,000 from us, or if you're, whatever. Baseball would be difficult to do that. But I think, some of these sports do need that infusion, swimming and diving, track and field, because then our Olympic sports lose out when you lose some of these colleges.
Good show, Scott. We did it. About 1 a.m. where you're at right now as we finish up. But anyway, thanks for joining us, listeners, on this Thursday morning. We'll be back with you next week. I'll probably be somewhere at an NCAA tournament. Who knows where Scott's going to be? But Scott Dochterman, Chad Leistikow will talk to you next week here on Legends and Listeners from the Channel Seed Studios and only on Iowa Everywhere.